The sun had a way of beating a man down in the Arizona territory, not just warming his skin but searing straight through to his bones. By late afternoon it became a living thing, heavy, relentless, breathing heat onto every stretch of earth it touched. Elias Boone felt all of it as he urged his weary sorrel horse, Whistler, across a rugged slope dotted with mesquite and cactus. The two had been riding since dawn, hunting for 3 cattle that had strayed from the herd earlier that morning. Elias didn't curse the animals for wandering. Cows were creatures of instinct, and instinct often led them toward whatever water they sensed. Instead, he cursed himself for letting them slip away under his watch. Elias wasn't the kind of cowboy who complained aloud, though. He preferred silence, the kind that let him hear the creak of his saddle or the buzz of cicadas thick in the brush. Silence was company enough. As the land stretched ahead of him, unfamiliar ridges rising like great rust-colored waves, he realized he had gone farther than intended. The terrain had shifted. Mesas taller, shadows deeper, and the tracks he'd been following had vanished into dry stone and broken scrub. He reined in Whistler, wiped the sweat from his brow, and stood in his stirrups to get a better look around. Far to the west, a canyon yawned open like a wound in the earth, narrow at one end, widening into a bowl of red rock layers shaped by centuries of wind and rain. He didn't recognize it, and that was reason enough to be cautious. But water ran through such places sometimes, and water drew strays. "Come on, boy," he murmured, giving Whistler a light nudge. The horse responded with a tired snort but obeyed, weaving down the slope toward the canyon floor. The path grew rocky, the kind that forced Elias to dismount and lead the horse by its reins. Stones shifted and slid under his boots. Each breath carried the scent of dust and sun-baked earth mingled with a faint sweetness from some blooming desert plant hiding in the thickets. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. The wind seemed to hold its breath. When he finally reached the canyon's mouth, he paused. Something about the place felt watched, though he saw no movement except for a lizard skittering across a boulder. The walls rose high on either side, streaked with desert varnish and shadows, ancient and unmoving. He walked slowly, leading Whistler between the stone giants. After a few minutes, the canyon opened wider. Dry riverbed sand stretched before him, pale and powdery beneath the oppressive sun. It was here, by pure accident, that Elias caught the flash. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, some reflection off a wet patch of riverbed. But there was no water here. He squinted, stepped forward, and crouched. The glint came again, sharp, unmistakable. He brushed aside sand with the back of his hand, clearing away the thin top layer until something metallic shone beneath. His breath hitched. He scraped more urgently, the grit collecting beneath his nails. Then he saw it clearly. Gold, not the flecks men sometimes pan for weeks to find, but a thick vein spidering through the rock, gold so pure and bright it seemed to glow from within. Elias stared at it a long moment, stunned not only by its beauty but by its promise. A man didn't just stumble on such wealth. Men spent lifetimes searching rivers and mountains for half this much, often coming up empty. But here it was, lying half exposed in a place no white man he knew ever mentioned. His heart pounded. A rush of dizzy possibility flooded him. New land, a cabin of his own, a herd twice the size of the one he worked for. Even Whistler would get a proper stall. But along with that rush came something colder. Uncertainty. This land, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt held, as though someone had laid claim to it long before he wandered in by chance. Elias wasn't the type to tread carelessly on another man's property, and certainly not the kind to steal from it. Still, he knelt there for a long time, letting his calloused fingers rest on the warm stone beside the vein. A man's fortune could be shaped by just a handful of decisions in his life. He wondered if this was one of them. The canyon gave him no answer. The heat settled around him like a heavy blanket, making the air ripple at the edges of his vision. A sudden rustle behind him shattered the stillness. Elias froze. It wasn't the scurry of a lizard this time. It was deliberate, soft, human. He rose slowly, turning his head without making any sudden move. His gut tightened as soon as he saw them, shapes blending with the red stone, silent as shadows. Apache. At least 6, maybe more hidden in the rocks above. Their presence felt woven into the canyon itself, as if they had been part of it long before he entered. Elias swallowed hard, forcing his hands to stay open and away from his gun. The nearest Apache stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a stern, unreadable face. Feathers hung from his dark hair, brushing the line of his jaw. His eyes were steady, not angry, but assessing, a man who measured worth not in words but in actions. Elias guessed he was the leader. "You ride where you should not," the man said. His English was measured, each word deliberate. Elias dipped his head. "Didn't know I crossed onto your land. I'm just lookin' for 3 cattle wandered from my herd." The Apache's gaze slipped momentarily to the exposed gold. Something hard flickered in his expression, something protective, almost fierce. Elias felt the weight of that look settle on his shoulders. "You dig for what is not yours," the leader said quietly. Elias shook his head. "I wasn't diggin', just brushed the sand aside when I saw the shine. Believe me, I ain't claimin' anything that belongs to someone else." The Apache stepped closer, his shadow falling across the gold as though shielding it from view. The others watched in stillness, hands resting near their weapons but not yet hostile. Elias understood well enough. This was sacred ground, perhaps not in the sense that temples were sacred, but in the older, deeper way land tied itself to a people. He crouched once more, not touching the vein this time, but the sand around it. Gently, he pushed the grains back over the gold, hiding it once again beneath the earth. He brushed until the surface looked as close to how he'd found it as he could manage. Then he stood and stepped back. The Apache leader watched every motion, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but as if re-evaluating the man before him. "That belongs to our people," he said again, though softer this time. Elias nodded. "Then it stays with your people. I had no business uncovering it." The leader studied him for a long moment, as though searching for signs of greed, deceit, or hidden intent. But Elias didn't break his gaze or offer excuses. He simply stood, the desert wind tugging at his worn shirt, as steady as the canyon walls around them. "What is your name?" the leader finally asked. "Elias Boone. I am Chayton." Elias gave a small respectful nod. "Reckon this is where I turn around and ride out." Chayton didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked over Elias, his sweat-stained clothes, the dust on his boots, the exhaustion in his eyes. Elias wasn't rich. That much was obvious. A man like that stumbling upon so much gold would be tempted, maybe not to steal, but to lie, to come back at night, to whisper its location to someone with less restraint. But Elias Boone had covered the gold instead. "Go," Chayton said at last, stepping aside. "Take care where you ride next time." "I will," Elias said. Then after a breath, he added, "Thank you for lettin' me leave." Chayton's expression didn't soften, but there was a glimmer, just a glimmer, of acknowledgement. Or maybe Elias imagined it. With slow, deliberate movements, Elias took Whistler's reins and mounted. He didn't look back as he rode toward the canyon's mouth. Only when he reached the open desert did he release the breath he'd been holding. He glanced once over his shoulder. The canyon stood still and silent, revealing nothing. The Apaches were gone. Or perhaps they were simply watching unseen once more. Either way, the gold lay hidden beneath sand he had returned to it. He left the canyon poorer than he had entered it. But as the desert wind picked up again, whispering across the land, Elias felt something settle inside him. A quiet pride, or maybe just the knowledge that he had walked away from temptation with his conscience intact. Whatever it was, it weighed lighter than gold. And he didn't know it yet, but the land, and the people who guarded it, would remember him.